Hi, thanks for requesting a lesson. My name's Bran Gresset with OnlineRockGuitarLessons.com, and the reason for sending you this video is to get you jump started with things before we ever get started with lessons. Now, this isn't to demonstrate things like scales or chords or teach you to play any songs like that just yet. This is how to physically play the instrument correctly before we jump into anything else. Let's get started. Now, before we get started talking about how to physically play the instrument correctly, you really should make sure your guitar is perfectly in tune. Now, the reason why this matters so much is no matter how good of a player you are, no matter how good your performance is, no matter how good your tone is, you will not sound good if your guitar is not properly in tune. That's just the way it is. Let me show you what I mean. This is what your guitar would sound like if it was drastically out of tune. No, no. Now that one's pretty obvious, but more often than not, your guitar is just going to be very slightly out of tune. Let me show you what that sounds like. Now, for comparison, this is what your guitar will sound like when it's perfectly in tune. Now, the first thing you want to be thinking about whenever you pick up your guitar is whether or not you're holding your guitar correctly. Now, the reason this is so important is because for both your picking hand and for your fretting hand, you want to have the easiest possible access to playing your instrument, as well as holding it as comfortably as possible to be able to perform the best that you can and play as cleanly as possible. Now, I personally, I don't prefer this sitting position, primarily because you have to rotate your torso inward to be able to access the higher end of the fretboard. And even at that, it's pretty awkward having to reach across your body like this to be able to access those notes. So let me show you the other sitting position because it's the one I tend to prefer. Now, instead of resting on your dominant leg, you're resting on your other leg. And what I mean by that is the leg opposite to your picking hand. Now, the reason I prefer this one over the other is because it has, in my opinion, the easiest possible access to the instrument. The body is now centered with my center of gravity to be able to do strumming or picking. My picking hand just has to sit here in the center of my body. And then I have very easy access to the entire fretboard. Now, there are a few common mistakes people might make with holding the guitar correctly. The first being is allowing the guitar to slouch like this. Now, the reason why you don't want to do this, not only does it impact your access to the fretboard and change the way your picking hand has to rest on the bridge, but you're not going to be able to grip the guitar correctly. And if you see, if my hand right here to grip the guitar correctly, I'm having to bend my arm in such an awkward way. You want to have the guitar tilted at, some angle. You call it a 45-degree angle, you call it a 30-degree angle. You're making a bit of a V here. You can just grip the neck with your fretting hand very comfortably at this angle. The next mistake commonly made by people is to tilt their guitar like this, away from their body. Now, it's understandable why people make this mistake. They want to be able to see the fretboard, they want to be able to see what they're doing. And there are ways to get around that I'll talk about here in a moment. But the problem here is that you're not going to be able to grip the fretboard correctly to be able to apply pressure. It's just going to hurt your hand. It's going to hurt your fingers. It's going to make it impossible to play cleanly. So you want to avoid tilting the guitar like this in any kind of way. You want to have it parallel to your torso while setting up like this. One last mistake I see pretty commonly people do is to lean back, slouch a little bit, get a little too comfortable playing. And the thing is, for some people, and especially for more advanced level guitarists, this isn't that big of a deal. You could still play cleanly, you can still have a good performance, but it's putting you at a bit of a disadvantage. You're having to compensate by rotating the guitar. You're going to make it to where, in order to properly grip the fretboard, you're going to have to rotate your hand in a strange way. You may have to tilt the guitar in a strange way. It's basically going to give you less access to playing the guitar correctly. So it's better to sit up straight, and you don't have to sit up, perfectly straight. You just want to sit up more natural and hold the guitar parallel and level with your torso and angle it such that you have the easiest possible access with your fretting hand. The next thing we're going to talk about are the basics of your picking hand. So the mentality you want to have for your picking hand is that you want to have the easiest possible access to playing the strings, whether it's accuracy on each individual string or for strumming. Now, let me show you my approach to this. The very first thing you want to do is you want to lay your wrist across the bridge. What I'm doing is I'm using this flat part of my hand, laying right across the bridge. And you notice right here where my hand meets my arm, right at the pivot point of the wrist, I rest on this corner. And the thing is you don't need to have that part of your hand always laying perfectly flat across there, but you do want to have roughly that area of your wrist resting on that corner so that you have a good pivot point for picking across the strings. From there, you can rest your arm on the end of the guitar. And now you've got a good pivot point on your arm to be able to accurately strum through the strings. And where it's important to do the wrist first to figure out where on your arm that pivot point is going to be, because it's going to be different depending on what guitar or how you're sitting or if you're standing. But the reason it's important to start with the wrist and then find that out is that now you can go back and forth between doing strums and immediately just rest your wrist and you can play very accurately on a whim. Real easy to do. A common mistake I do see people doing, even if they have the wrist in the right place, is they still continue to use their strumming motion, using their arm, stiffening up their arm to pick on each individual string. Now, the problem with this is not only are you using way more energy than you need to, but you're stiffening up your performance by doing that. And worst of all, you're far more likely to strike other strings when trying to accurately pick in each individual string. You're not going to play as clean. Your performance is going to sound stiff. And it's just all around is just much more difficult to be able to play like that. Now, I think it's easy to assume when doing a full wrist motion that you're going to be doing a side to side motion like this. And where sometimes you're going to have a bit of that kind of motion. Sometimes you're even going to have a bit of a rotating motion. But most of the time, you're actually going to have more of a knocking motion like this. So I'm going to show you an exercise to be able to take that approach and actually start picking on each individual string with that. What you do is you lay your wrist in that accurate position right there on the end of your wrist on the bridge. Loosen your fingers, get a good grip on your guitar pick between your pointing finger and your thumb, and start doing a knocking motion like this. Then slowly start to rotate your wrist with that towards the strings. And once you're ready, bring that motion to a string and make it a very small back and forth motion with that knocking motion. Even just going back and forth. You can make it a very small, accurate motion, even with a very loose grip on the pick. And it'd be very easy for you to go back and forth on a string accurately. Okay, so now let's talk about the actual grip on the guitar pick itself. Now, very often I'll see, especially in beginner level guitar players, that they like to hold their guitar pick with two fingers against their thumb like this. And where this could be problematic is you're stiffening the pick, um, which will sacrifice fluidity of the pick between the strings. And what that's going to end up doing is you're going to have a very stiff sounding performance, but also you're going to end up making your guitar fall out of tune much quicker, and your strings are going to deaden a lot faster. So overall, it's just not a good idea. Um, and I know, especially in beginner level guitar players, you're afraid that you're going to end up just dropping your pick. But bear with me. I'm going to show you some techniques to make it to where you can feel safe that you're going to have good, secure grip on your guitar pick. So there's a variety of different ways that you could actually hold the pick itself between your pointing finger and your thumb. Um, James Hetfield likes to hold his pick at the tips of his fingers like this. I've seen a lot of people hold their guitar pick like this, where they have the pick on the side of their pointing finger like this up against their thumb. Um, and while all those work, I'm going to show you the way that I like to approach this. So the idea is, if you've ever seen that silly heart emoji you can make with your pointing finger and your thumb like this, very similar. You're going to have a bit of a slant to your thumb in relation to your pointing finger, but instead of being like this, you're actually going to have them touching each other like that. Pointing finger is almost pointing straight down in relation to the guitar pick, and the thumb is still has that bit of a slant. And the idea is you have the flats of both your pointing finger and your thumb laying completely flat across the pick. And what this causes is it has more friction on the surface area of the pick, so you're much less likely to actually drop it. Um, which also allows you to have a much lighter grip, which I'm going to talk about now. Having a harsh grip on your guitar pick has the same problem as having two fingers, but it's actually much worse. Having a really harsh grip on your guitar pick, you're going to stiffen your performance. You're definitely going to make your guitar fall out of tune much quicker, and you're going to deaden your strings as well. So let me show you just about how lightly you should be holding your guitar pick. So I'm sure you've all seen this magic trick before, where you make a pen or a pencil look like it's bending like that. You want to hold your guitar pick roughly as lightly as you would hold a pen or a pencil to pull off doing this magic trick. Now, you do have to hold the pen or a pencil pretty lightly to do this. Um, I wouldn't say you need to hold it as light as you would hold a pen or a pencil to do this trick. So maybe a slight bit more firm than you would to do this trick. But overall, you want to be holding the pick lightly so it flows through the strings nice and easy. Now, you don't need to always have a really delicate, light grip on the guitar pick. It really just depends on exactly what you're trying to actually do. I'd say more often than not, you're going to have that light grip on the guitar pick. But you might have times where you want to strike at the strings really hard for a certain note or some extra emphasis and to to get a really powerful hit. But the idea is that you have control over that. You choose when that happens, not you're gripping it at all times because you're afraid to drop it. You do and I wouldn't even grip it as hard as you can, even when you're trying to get a hard hit. The point is that you choose when that happens for the sake of having a certain note perform a certain way. You're not doing it because you're afraid to drop the guitar pick. The next thing I want to talk about is your fretting hand. Now, the mentality you want to have for your fretting hand is that you want to gain as much leverage as possible over the strings to give you as easy a time as possible to apply pressure to the strings. Now, the most common mistake I see with fretting is grabbing at the neck incorrectly. For instance, I see this very often where people grab the neck like this. And where this is a problem is not only are you going to have to curl your fingers in awkward ways, but even to reach the higher strings on the top part of the neck, you're having to reach all the way across. And what ends up happening is not only are you muting strings, but you're having to press in very awkward ways in order to apply enough pressure to actually fret the string. You're just making it much more uncomfortable for yourself. You're more likely to cramp your fingers. You're more likely to hurt the tips of your fingers because you're having to press harder with the tips of your fingers. All around, it's just not a good idea. In order to properly grab at the neck correctly, you want to have your palm roughly parallel to the bottom of the neck, like this, not touching, but roughly parallel. And you want to be able to grab at the neck like this, right? And the idea behind this is to have the most possible leverage. By default, you generally want to be applying pressure between your thumb and your middle finger. You're going to be grabbing between your thumb and your middle finger most of the time. You're going to, most of the time as well, be placing your thumb roughly in the middle of the neck and grabbing between your thumb and your middle finger. Now, there's several reasons to do this. Uh, Firstly, just to have the most possible leverage, you're grabbing at the neck between your thumb and your middle finger, but also you create a pivot point on your thumb to be able to go higher in notes and lower than notes. Having your thumb just in one place makes it very easy to access the fretboard. But you don't necessarily always have your thumb in the center of the neck. It just depends on how you need to gain the most possible leverage. For instance, if I'm going to be playing notes on the high E string, in order to gain the most possible leverage, you actually need to be pressing down on the top of the neck with your thumb just a little bit to be able to apply the proper leverage. You can't grab it from down here. That's actually very awkward and uncomfortable. So, actually, what you end up doing is to play the top strings, you have your thumb in the center, and the lower down you go, you're moving your thumb up the neck this way to be able to gain the most possible leverage on the strings that you're playing. Another thing to think about is you're not always going to be applying pressure between your thumb and your middle finger necessarily. Just depends on where you need the leverage. For instance, if you're going to be playing a bar chord, because you're laying your pointing finger across the entire fretboard to bar the chord, you're actually going to be grabbing between your pointing finger and your thumb instead of your thumb and your middle finger. So, like I said, the mentality is just that you want to optimize as much leverage as possible. So, you don't necessarily have to go by the rule of always have your thumb in the center and always be grabbing it a certain way. It's more about understanding how to gain the most possible leverage between your thumb and your fingers in order to play what it is you're playing in the moment. The next thing you want to be thinking about for fretting correctly is where to place your finger in accordance to the fret you're wanting to play to have the cleanest possible note. To describe this, I'm going to talk to you about the length of the string because this is where the note comes from. So, first off, with an open string, your string is laying across your guitar, pinched at the nut by your headstock and pinched at the bridge, leaving an open note for your string. Whenever you place your finger on a fret, you're shortening the length of the string by pinching it in a completely different place. And because of this, it's important to place your finger up against a fret like this. It's very common for people to put their finger on the fret. What this ends up doing is you're just muting one half of the string on the other side of the fret, making it a very messy sounding note. You want to be right up against the fret, pinching the string on the fret to change the length of the string, therefore changing the note. One last thing, I wanted to give you an exercise for being able to play between the strings without actually having to look at them. Now, this goes back to the mistake I discussed with holding the guitar incorrectly, where you might feel inclined to rotate the guitar towards you like this so that you can see the strings and see what you're doing. But as I had mentioned before, that's just going to impact your ability to play the instrument. So, what you actually want to do is you want to utilize these dots on the top of your neck to be able to understand what fret you're playing. They're placed consistently on every guitar on the same exact frets. So the first one being on the third fret, the second one on the fifth, third on the seventh fret, fourth on the ninth fret, and then on the double dot, you've got your 12th fret. So you're able to determine what fret you're playing just from these dots. But that doesn't help with being able to play between the strings because you can't really see that. But you're not supposed to. It's more of a feeling thing. And let me explain a good exercise for this that can help you with this. So starting with your pointing finger on the first dot on the third fret and your ring finger on the fifth fret or the second dot, you want to go between first dot to second dot or third fret to fifth fret, like that. And after you do that, feel for the next string down and do the same thing. Then do that again, go to the next string, and so forth. Then you can go backwards. Feel for the next string up, feel for the next string up, and so forth. And you don't have to necessarily go third fret to fifth fret, or first dot to second dot. You can go down. The idea is the same. It's an exercise to help you to be able to feel for the strings you need to play, as opposed to having to look at it. Utilize the dots on the top of the neck to know what fret you're playing, and then feel for the string you need to play. So that wraps up with me showing you how to properly physically play the guitar correctly. But I'm going to leave you with a few other things to think about. Firstly, practice does make perfect, but only if you practice things correctly to begin with. If you end up practicing things in a bad way, you're just going to build bad habits, and it's going to make the fight much more difficult for you in the long run. The reason I'm saying this is that I want you to learn to play with intention. Now, what I mean by this is anytime you're learning to play something new song, new riff, maybe you're writing something, you need to learn to strategize the way that you're playing. With your fretting hand, you need to choose what finger am I going to use for this particular note, such that I have easy access to getting to the next note. Same with your picking hand. Do I do a downstroke, upstroke, such that the next note I need to play is easy to access? And you're not just strategizing these things, especially with your picking hand. You need to be strategizing, how do I do my performance? How hard do I strike this note? Where do I strike it at? Do I do a pitched harmonic? Do I do bends? There's so much out there to explore to make your performance as good as possible, to express yourself, to sound just like the artists you want to sound like. And that's all the kinds of stuff that we'll be exploring in lessons. One last thing I want you to be thinking about. What are your goals as a guitarist? Do you want to learn to write eventually? Are you wanting to play in a band? Do you just want to learn to play your favorite songs or imitate your favorite artist? And you may not have any idea of what your goals are, and that's fine. But my goal is to customize the lessons to who you want to be playing guitar. Now, if you have goals, then we'll work towards those. And if you don't, I'll introduce things to you. We'll start playing around with potential things that you could be trying, learning to write, maybe how to potentially play with a band, or maybe we just settle on learning to play some songs. But ultimately, what this means is that I'm going to throw everything out that you don't need to be learning and only be teaching things that you actually enjoy. Now, another thing I want you to be thinking about is what music that you love. Something that's very important to learning to play an instrument is being able to express the music that you love through the instrument. I've always said that playing an instrument is like listening to music on steroids, and it's so much better when it's music you actually enjoy. So bring that information to me as well. Who do you love learning to play? What are your favorite songs? Who's your favorite guitarist? We're going to incorporate that into everything we do. Whether it is you want to learn how to play songs or learn to write, learn to imitate an artist, all of this will guide how I teach you so that you have the most possible fun learning to play the instrument to the best possible ability that you can. Thanks for requesting the lesson. I look forward to working with you. Rock out.